The following is a presentation of the Women's Football Alliance.
When the season started 10 weeks ago, the road was filled with traffic. Some teams took an early exit. Now there are just 24 teams remaining on the road to Canton. Welcome to the Road to Canton. I am your host, Brian Sweeney, the voice of the Women's Football Alliance Pro Division National Championship game. 64 teams across 3 divisions and a developmental league all embarked on a road to Canton back on April 22nd. Now, across 3 divisions, we have 8 teams remaining in each of those divisions, all looking for that trip to Canton, Ohio. Let's start by looking at the Division III playoff matchups. In the Southeast region, the number 1 overall seed for Division III, Palm Beach Coyotes, will host the Virginia Panthers. In the Northeast region, the New York Knockout will host the Maine Mayhem. These 2 teams met in Week 3, with New York coming out on top 12-8. In the Pacific region, the New Mexico Banditas will welcome the Rocky Mountain Thundercats. These 2 teams played a home-and-home series during the regular season, with each team taking the win at home. And in the Midwest region, the Sioux Falls Snow Leopards will welcome the Zydeco Spice. From last year's postseason to this year's postseason, all 8 teams in the Division III playoffs are new. Alex, your thought on the Division III playoff bracket?
Well, I think I'd like to start in the Northeast, where my game to watch in this opening round of the WFA Playoffs in Division III comes in the Northeast. It starts with New York Knockout and the Maine Mayhem. They're within 2 spots of each other in basically every category up and down the statistical board. And New York is feeling frustrated after missing last year's playoff because their schedule wasn't tough enough. This year, even though you have a blowout loss to New York Wolves of Division II, you certainly had a stronger schedule that allows Knockout to make the playoff this year, and they should realistically win at home. Elsewhere, looking to the south, I think Palm Beach shouldn't have too much trouble with Virginia. Virginia leads in basically every statistical category in Division III, but they haven't played anybody. Whereas I think you look at what Palm Beach has done, they had a very tough schedule with the Orlando Anarchy 2 times. They had a really difficult matchup against those 2 teams, and they built a schedule well enough to be able to put themselves in a good position in this first year. Taking a look at the Western Conference and the teams that are out west, I want New Mexico over Rocky Mountain. It should be high scoring, but I think New Mexico's defense is going to be good enough. Their defense has given up 8 points at home this season to Division III opponents. That's pretty darn good. And you also look at elsewhere, they had an impressive win against a WFA Pro team, one of the only Division III teams to beat a WFA Pro team in the Mile High Blaze. Rocky Mountain, by that same metric, lost Mile High 42-0. In terms of the Midwest, I look at Sioux Falls and Zydeco Spice. It's interesting because statistically, we've seen the Sioux Falls Snow Leopards before here in Minnesota. We've seen that team really start to build itself up here now at the Division III level. But again, that argument for them is they still haven't played anybody. They pass the ball a lot. They don't run the ball much, but they lead and are in the top of a number of statistical categories. Zydeco Spice has 1 win on the season. But when you look at the rest of the body of the work, the teams that they have played, they played at Dallas, they played Arlington, they played Houston. This should be a very close competitive matchup, and if any road team's going for the upset on Saturday in the opening round, I'd take the Zydeco Spice.
All-time favorite for Division III? Who do you think is going to win it all?
If I had to pick it right now, I would probably go New Mexico. I like what they've done so far this season. We've talked a lot about New Mexico, not necessarily on this show, but across the WFA in terms of how that New Mexico team has done over the course of this year. I think, to me, they're the favorite Division III. I think they will more likely than not play Palm Beach in the Canton, Ohio Division III championship game, but I think that New Mexico has the offense and the defense to get the job done in Canton.
Thanks, Alex.
Oh, yeah.
The All-American rosters are out. Congratulations to all the amazing athletes that will be competing and representing the American and national conferences in Canton, Ohio. Next up is the Division II playoff bracket. In the American Conference, the number 1 overall seed OKC Lady Force welcomed the Sun City Stealth. The Nebraska Pride will welcome the Austin Outlaws. In the National Conference, the Columbus Chaos welcomed the Baltimore Nighthawks. These two teams met back on May 20th, with Baltimore narrowly coming out on top 8-6. And the Atlanta Rage will welcome the New York Wolves. Alex, Austin, Baltimore, and Columbus were all in the postseason last year, and OKC played in the Division III National Championship. There are some really good games to look forward to in the Division II playoffs. Your thoughts?
Well, I think Oklahoma City, as defending Division III national champion, seems to me to be the clubhouse leader in Division II. If I were to pick any team right now, I think I'm leaning Oklahoma City. Between their running game, their defense, and the passing game that they have is good enough to win Division II. Let's look first at the American Conference. The American Conference as a whole is incredibly top-heavy because it's OKC, Nebraska, and then there's a large gap. There were 5 teams in that conference. One of the 5 was sitting out, and that's where you have this opening round matchup between Oklahoma City and Sun City. That's going to be prohibitively lopsided in favor of OKC. You look at what Sun City has done this year, they haven't been good on the road. They're 0 for 3 with a pair of losses in that span to Division III teams. It's a team in Sun City Stealth that we're used to producing All-Americans, specifically on the offensive side of the ball, but I think the question just becomes, can they contend with OKC? No, I don't think that one will be particularly close. Looking at the other matchup, Nebraska and Austin, we've seen Nebraska a lot this year, and we know that Nebraska, their offensive style and their offensive structure right now lends well to the WFA Pro style game. They've had a ton of success this year using that air raid attack. Nicole Skolnick at quarterback, Mika Richards, an All-American, and Essence Bell, both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, figure to be a significant factor in this game against Austin. Again, not necessarily anything that Austin has to worry about because Austin did pretty well on the road this year, 2-1 as a road team, but they have to be able to contend with a Nebraska defense that does very, very well at home. Remember, 21 points allowed to a very good offense in the Minnesota Vixen at home for Nebraska. But elsewhere, you see that they've done a great job of limiting teams' scoring opportunities, no more than double digits in any other home game this year for Nebraska. So I like Nebraska to go on to OKC in the conference final week. Elsewhere, let's look at the East. New York and Atlanta is an interesting one to me. I think that the winner of that game more likely than not goes to Canton, Ohio. Here's why. Columbus and Baltimore both are very defensively sound. They don't score enough points. And when I look at New York Wolves and when I look at Atlanta Rage, both of them have done a very good job of scoring points. Atlanta, we know, has had a great body of work against WFA Pro opponents, the Alabama Fire this season. We know that they've done a really good job in putting up points elsewhere in their season. Same too with the New York Wolves. Did not make the playoffs last year, a season ago. They want vengeance. They want to be able to prove that the New York Wolves are back and ready to go. We've talked all season about teams that might make that jump from Division II up to the WFA Pro Division. Atlanta figures to be there. New York with the metropolitan size figures to be there, and the same too with Oklahoma City. The winner of that game, Atlanta and New York, will go on to the WFA Pro Division. I look at Baltimore and Columbus. The offense, again, has been a struggle. You mentioned the score in that first game was 8-6. That's the scoreline that I expect here. It's not going to be an offensive powerhouse that you need to see these teams start moving up. Columbus, since they came into the league last year, they've been defensive-minded, but they don't score enough points to put themselves in a good position. All-Americans on defense, but the offense just isn't there for them. And Baltimore knows that well, but they have just enough in the tank, does Baltimore, to be able to pull out the win in that one. So New York and Atlanta, again, I think that's going to be the matchup to watch. Realistically, that should be the conference final in the National Conference in Division II, but unfortunately, it just has to be now, just based on the way that the Massey ratings worked out. I think that Atlanta is the favorite there, but keep in mind, New York's offense, hotter than all blazes. So certainly you look at where Atlanta is. If New York's defense is able to pick up a stop here or there, well, then all of a sudden you get Atlanta into a shootout. And I don't think that that's necessarily a game that they want to get into because they had those games against Alabama Fire where they had to have shootout styles of offense and they didn't get victories in them. And so the question becomes is that if New York gets a stop, what happens to the Atlanta Rage? Do they continue on the road to Canton, or does the road come end early at home?
So do you think if they were playing on the opposite fields, it would make any difference?
Well, I still think that's a tough question. I think Atlanta certainly has the ability to go and win on the road. But because that game is in Atlanta, that almost home field advantage of sorts in Atlanta, I think gives them a slight edge in it. But if you flip it, I mean, New York, very good at home, and that travel time and that ability to get into New York, I think really would limit what Atlanta's able to do. So I think that New York would be the favorite if they were home, but since they're not, they're going to have their defense help them out.
Thanks, Alex. And we'll be right back.
The Women's Football Alliance wants to thank their sponsors. Thank you for your support of the Women's Football Alliance.
Welcome back. Lois Cook is back this week to give us an inside look on how a kid transforms into a football player in her segment, Low on the Go.
Oh! Oh my goodness. What? Oh, look. Oh, hey. You want to know what I'm looking at? Well, it's the perfect combination of and whatever. As if your reaction is going to be any different. See for yourself.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. You are now tuned in to the greatest of all time, the greatest of all time. One for the money, you know what it is. Two for the show, yeah, we shut it down. Three, just to make sure you ready. Four, let them know that we run this town. One for the money, you know what it is. Two for the show, yeah, we shut it down. Three, just to make sure you One for the money, you know what it is. Two for the show, yeah, we shut it down. Three, just to make sure you ready. Four, let them know that we run this town. One for the money, you know what it is. Two for the show, yeah, we shut it down. Three, just to make sure you ready. Four, let them know that we run this town. One for the money, you know what it is. Two for the show, yeah, we shut it down. Three, just to make sure you ready. Four, let them know that we run this town. One for the money, you know what it is. Two for the show, yeah, we shut it down. One for the money, you know what it is. Two for the show, yeah, we shut it down. Three, just to make sure you ready. Four, let them know that we run this town. One for the money, you know what it is. Two for the show, yeah, we shut it down. Shut it down. Three, just to make sure you ready. Four, let them know that we run this town.
Told you.
You know, Brian, it's so inspiring to see young people become football players and really develop who they are through this game of football. And we had the opportunity to find a picture of you as a youngster.
Great. I don't know if I quite want to see that, but not to be outdone, I did get a hold of your wife and your mother, and we have one of you as well,
Oh
Alex.
boy, I don't know that I want to see that either.
Here they are, everybody.
Just look at that hair. Look at that hair.
5 of the 8 teams to make the playoffs in the Pro Division were in last year's playoffs, and 4 of those teams have made the playoffs the last 3 years. This year's Pro Division has some of the best football action in women's football history. Let's look at the games in the Pro Division playoff bracket. In their first division in the WFA, the Alabama Fire are the number 2 seed in the National Conference and will host the 3-3 Pittsburgh Passion. In the American Conference, The 4-time national champion St. Louis Slam are the number 1 seed and will welcome the number 4 seed 4-1 Cali War. St. Louis's defense was a wall this season and didn't allow a single point to be scored against them, and Cali was the second highest scoring offense in the Pro Division. The St. Louis Slam and Cali War are 2 teams that are used to playing some of the biggest games of the season. This game will be live on the For the Fans network. Alex, your thoughts on this game?
Well, Brian, I think it's safe to say both of us were expecting this game to occur later in the postseason, but the Massey ratings came out, and I remember that Sunday we were in California after doing the Minnesota-Cali game that night, and how surprised we were that Houston made the jump over Cali. 0.01. The difference between the Cali War and the Houston Energy. And there's reasons for that. We'll talk about that here in a minute, but this is a game that I thought was a conference championship game. I thought until week number 8, this is a game we were going to see in early July, determining who will take on the Boston Renegades in Canton, Ohio on ESPN2. But not how it's going to be. The Cali War have been difficult this season to really get a true marker of who they are as a team. We talk about the Cali War. They scored 50 points in every game except for their last game in Week 8 against Minnesota, which held them to their lowest output of the season at 32. You say 32 points, how's that a low output? Well, compared to the body of work the Cali War had going into that game against Minnesota, yes, that's absolutely the low water mark. We talked about all season how the Cali War's schedule left them vulnerable, and left them vulnerable to playing on the road. This is proof of that now. 0.01, the difference between the Cali War and the Houston Energy, saving Cali from the trip to Minnesota, but also sending them to a difficult destination in St. Louis. We know from personal experience how difficult playing a game at St. Louis is, and the Cali War are going to have to bear the brunt of that this week in the opening round of the playoff. It's also an interesting journey for the Cali War. This is their first road game since April the 29th, week 2 against Nevada. And so the question becomes, how does that delay in travel affect what Cali War is able to do? I think the advantage for Cali here, if there is one, I think the advantage to Cali is that this will be the most difficult offense that the St. Louis Slam has faced all season long in terms of points, yards per game, and overall production ability. You mentioned that the St. Louis Slam have not given up a point on defense yet this season through 6 games, a stretch that the WFA at the top level of it has never seen. And you look at that game last week of the regular season against Derby City, it's a 6-point game for Derby City where they got 6 points off of a pick 6. That's still pretty darn good. I would say, I mean, if the only reason why the teams is able to score points against you is your offense, that's having a good season. And we've said all along, and I've said on this program before, the only team to me that has a chance to beat Boston is the St. Louis Slam. But let's take a look further. For the Cali War, the big focus for me is who plays quarterback. We saw and we heard from the coaching staff in Cali that the two teams, the Cali War has 2 quarterbacks. They switch between Tanya Guzman and they switch between Chantel Nino-Wiggins, and they switch off drives evenly. We saw in the 4th quarter against Minnesota, they stopped doing that. And I think that they have to stop doing that again against St. Louis in the opening round of the playoff. They can't do that. You could get away with that against Nevada. You could get away with that against Central Valley and other teams that Cali War has played. You can't do that at the WFA Pro level. You need consistency, and you need someone who's going to be able to navigate your offense. You can certainly go with the experience of Nino-Wiggins, but you could also go with the athleticism of Guzman. We saw both in that game against Minnesota. Some very talented quarterbacks. It's just a question of who does Jeff and Lisa King go to in terms of who do they want to start and carry the offense in that game. They have the weapons. We know they have the weapons. They have it in the running game. We know Nori Washington's going to be a factor. We know Brianna Barrett's going to be a factor. We know Jamie Robinson's going to be a factor on the defensive side. But the Cali War need to play as a team. We saw that when they got behind to Minnesota. When Minnesota started making their comeback, we saw them play as individuals. They have to play as a team and put the ego aside to have a chance against the St. Louis Slam. For me, Brian, St. Louis returns as the American Conference playoff favorite. They missed out last season as that fifth team, the last one out, when the lights went on their season a little bit prematurely than perhaps it should have. But you look at where they're at. Jamie Gall has been a phenomenal quarterback this season, certainly will be in the All-American game if St. Louis isn't playing in the national championship game as well. You look at the running game. Jada Humphrey has supplanted Taylor Hay as that feature running back for the St. Louis Slam. You look at the two on the receiving game. Carrie McMahon has supplanted the well-established wide receiver as well, Kaylee Knightsley. They are retooling in St. Louis, and for Quincy Davis and his team, it's worked really well this season. They have been able to score points, but they've struggled against WFA opposition in the points. Problem is, when your defense doesn't give up any points, you can score as many or as few as you'd like. Because as long as that zero is on the other side of the board, you're going to win football games. And certainly that's what St. Louis has used to their vantage point and to their success this season. And especially, too, you consider that offense coming off of a reeling, back on your heels effort against Minnesota in Week 8. This should be something where we see St. Louis attack Cali's defense early and often. I expect number of big plays deep down the sidelines to try to take advantage of a secondary that really got exploited through the run game and the passing game by Minnesota in Week 8. Cali, again, has the opportunity for an upset. It's a small one, but they have it. They have the experience. They have the ability to win on the road in the playoffs, but they have to play as a team. We've talked about that all season. They have to prove that their stats against the lower division teams can manifest themselves against their toughest test of the season now in the St. Louis Slam. But with that being said, I like where St. Louis is playing. I like that St. Louis is playing at home. And until somebody scores a point on offense against the St. Louis Slam, the Slam aren't going anywhere except to Canton, Ohio.
Do you think Cali will get that point on offense?
I think to me, that's not a question at this point. I think Cali Ward does score a touchdown, at least one. The question just becomes is how many, and how many can their defense limit St. Louis to be able to force a playoff upset and a trip either to Houston or Minnesota.
Thank you. Tickets are on sale now for the Women's Football Alliance National Championship Weekend in Canton, Ohio. For more information, head over to hofvillage.com and search Women's Football Alliance 2023. Now, let's look at the two games on the Women's Sports Network. In the National Conference, the #1 overall seed and back-to-back-to-back-to-back national champion Boston Renegades will play the 3-3 DC Divas, who were the last team to have beaten the Renegades all the way back on May 19th, 2018. Alex, this will be the early game on the Women's Sports Network, and these two teams are used to playing each other. Your thoughts on this time around?
Well, I think the answer to the question, do the DC Divas have a chance in this game? I'm going to look at the camera right here, and I'm going to tell you, no. No, they don't. They don't have a chance in this game. It should not be close, but there are some things in that game that make it interesting. You look at, this is a game from a year ago, the opening round of the playoffs, in which Allison Cahill was injured against the DC Divas, and we saw the emergence of Shantae Bonds as a phenomenal championship caliber quarterback. I don't expect that to happen this year, and certainly we don't want it to happen. But it's something to consider, too, that these are the long-tenured playoff rivals. They've gone head-to-head so many times with playoff opportunity on the line, and now it's just another chapter in that rivalry, head-to-head between Boston and DC, that we'd love to see so much. Now, Boston's high water mark in points allowed on defense this season, 25 to the DC Divas. However, that did come in an 84-25 win for the Boston Renegades. So it doesn't really matter that much, but it's something worth noting. Take it with a grain of salt, of course. Boston has rolled teams at home this season. Home games for the Boston Renegades, as they have been in years past, have not been particularly close. Look at the two games that they played against teams that were not the DC Divas. They shut out Tampa Bay. They shut out Pittsburgh. And I don't think that there's going to be a third shutout in the home schedule for Boston this season, combined what they have here this week against DC and next week either against Pittsburgh or Alabama. More likely Alabama than Pittsburgh, in my opinion. But it's still something to keep an eye on, where the Boston Renegades should, and rightfully so, are heavily favored in this contest. But let's look at the DC Divas. They're hot right now. right? We've had conversations on this program about DC being a playoff bubble team, but then you go and beat a Tampa Bay, you go and beat a Pittsburgh, and you go and beat the teams that were ahead of you. And so give DC all the credit in the world. We talked about them as a bubble team. They made it so that way they were firmly off the bubble by the time, you could argue, really, week 6 was over. And they were able to cruise into the playoffs just based on that strong effort that they had. Let's talk about Amanda Congliotti, a quarterback who's playing as well as any quarterback in the WFA Pro Division right now. We heard that 6 combined touchdowns for her against the Pittsburgh Passion. That's incredible. And certainly, she has the ability to take over a game. And we saw that against Pittsburgh. She was the star of the show against the Pittsburgh Passion. And so she certainly has that ability to make that happen again, but it's the Boston Renegades. And so we're going to have to ask the question of, is it enough this time out? Wide receiver, Shaquanda Gainey, All-American a year ago, leads the WFA in receiving yards and is a phenomenal, I would say, the best pure wide receiver in the WFA's Pro Division. But again, those 2 options are not enough against a team like the Boston Renegades that is everything you want in a football team. I mean, taking a look at it, it's just not enough for DC to end this 5-year winning streak for the Boston Renegades. Boston's too deep, particularly at running back, because we saw in Canton last year. We've seen all sorts of years. They have not 3 this year, but 4 running backs that can contribute meaningful yardage, and each one of those running backs between Falkowski, Mata, Kusanen, and the other names that they have, they all bring something different to the table that a defensive coordinator has to game plan around. And really for DC, they have the experience of seeing him, but they're just too deep. And that's just where it comes to for the Boston Renegades. They're also too talented at the skill positions. You look at quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. We haven't even talked about Adrian Smith and the ability that she has and that connection with Allison Cahill. Adrian Smith in last year's national championship game against Minnesota did not record a catch. It did not matter, as Minnesota was able to do absolutely nothing to stop the Boston Renegade offense and couldn't do enough against their defense to make that game realistically close. And so DC's road to Canton, unfortunately, for another time in their history, has to end in Revere, Massachusetts, coming up on Saturday.
Yeah, it's too bad because DC is such a strong, loved team by everybody in that area.
Well, I think it's not just loved by everybody in the area, it's loved by the entire WFA community. You talk about who the DC Divas are and their identity as a team. It's a very likable team and a very likable group of people, but the problem is, just with that conference, is that if your road to Canton runs through Boston, it's going to end. And it's like when you're driving down the highway and you see the do not go any further stop, but then all of a sudden you have a lead brick on the gas pedal and you're going flying off the course. That's just how it is when you have to go into Boston in the playoffs. You can't win.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking of the Renegades, in the last week of the regular season, Allison Cahill, quarterback for the Boston Renegades, became the first quarterback in women's football history to surpass 25,000 yards. Yes, that's 25,000 yards of passing. Congratulations go out to Allison on this amazing accomplishment. And we'll be right back.
The Women's Football Alliance wants to thank their sponsors. Thank you for your support of the Women's Football Alliance.
Welcome back. Let's look at the final game of the Week 1 Pro Division playoff matchups. The 2-time reigning American Conference champion, Minnesota Vixen, will welcome the 5-1 Houston Energy. These 2 teams met back on May 13th, with the Vixen doubling up the Energy 28-14. Thanks to an email that we received at roadtocantonshow.com, I am super excited to show this wonderful Jellycat plush football. I think it would make a great gift for anybody that's playing in the national championship.
Well, I certainly think that it would. It's comfortable, it's a great toy, and you know, when you're throwing it in the house, it's not going to break any windows. Plus, I think it's just a wonderful thing to have. It's good to have something that's comfortable to start getting your younger children to start thinking about playing the game of football.
I love it. Thank you to the people at Jellycat for sending that my way. From 64 to 24, the teams on the road to Canton are starting to exit fast, and next time we will look at the 6 conference championship games. For Lois Cook and Alex Wested, I'm Brian Sweeney, and we'll see you next time on the road to Canton.
Thank you for watching the preceding presentation from the Women's Football Alliance.